information the Obama administration no likey? They've been sons of bitches on government. Sons of bitches on government.
If you have Wi-Fi, turn it off.
It's not going to work.
It's not going to work here, right?
So we don't need John Stewart actually to answer the Instead, what I'm going to ask while they're trying to figure out the technology.
Turn the mic on. The light's on.
We're having technical difficulties. But until the audio-visual gets squared away, I'm going to ask our panelists to kick us off by just giving us some of their personal background as to what brought them to whistleblower advocacy, why they personally came to work in this area, and why it's so important to them.
Hi, I'm Jesselyn Radack with the Government Accountability Project. My circuitous route to my job, people are like, how did you get into this whole whistleblowing thing? And it was because I myself was a whistleblower right after 9/11. During the George W. Bush administration, I had been the ethics advisor at the Justice Department who advised not to interrogate the quote-unquote American Taliban, John Walker Lind, without his attorney, and parenthetically not to torture him. Unfortunately, the government did both, and I advised not to use that in a criminal prosecution, which is of course exactly what the government did. I did not blow the whistle on a number of occasions when the Attorney General bragged about having provided him counsel and having treated him carefully and scrupulously regarding his rights, when obviously trophy photos of this guy were circulating around the world, bound up, gagged, and blindfolded and bound to a board. But I didn't blow the whistle until I found out that there was a federal court order for all of the Justice Department's correspondence related to the Lind interrogation, and the file with all of my emails regarding that had been purged. So, as one of those crazy 29-year-olds, I called technical support and resurrected more than a dozen of the missing emails, wrote a memo to my boss attaching the emails, took home a copy in case they disappeared again, and resigned. I thought my ordeal had ended at that point, but unfortunately not, because the criminal trial continued, and it became perfectly evident that my emails had not been turned over to the court in accordance with its order. And for me personally, regardless of what you think of John Walker Lind, I couldn't live with it on my conscience that someone could be put to death because of what I knew. So I ended up giving copies of the emails to the media, which wrote a story that basically collapsed the John Walker Lind case. And again, I thought my ordeal was over. But for doing that, I ended up being put under one of the first federal criminal leak investigations in this country, referred to the state bars where I'm licensed as an attorney, and put on the no-fly list. Obviously, this was retaliation for having blown the whistle, and it has lived with me for the last 10 years until this past summer when the DC bar complaint got dismissed after more than a decade. after that, I decided I was going to dedicate my life to representing whistleblowers. And I ended up working for Ellen Grayson, representing defense contractors alleging reconstruction fraud in Iraq. He got elected to Congress. I needed a job. And so I went to the Government Accountability Project to start their National Security and Human Rights Program. I thought I would be dealing with whistleblowers who were being demoted or having their security clearances pulled or even getting fired. But instead, I heard that this guy, Thomas Drake, had been indicted under the Espionage Act, of all things, for revealing fraud, waste, and abuse at the NSA. And I knew at that point we had crossed the Rubicon, because for all the stuff I had to go through, at least I never got indicted. And he did. And we fought that case and ultimately won. But I thought this one weird off with Tom Drake would not repeat itself after the case collapsed in such spectacular fashion. But unfortunately, the Obama administration has brought some 8 prosecutions against national security and intelligence leakers who are really whistleblowers under the Espionage Act, more so than any president ever, and then all presidents combined. One of the first people where the Espionage Act was used against him for non-spy purposes was Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers whistleblower. Yet the Obama administration has seized on this and unfortunately taken my work in a very different direction than I ever expected. So that's how I got into my line of work.
So hi, my name is Trevor Timm. I'm the director of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, and I think I started getting into this issue around 2010. I just graduated law school and was working on a book with the former lawyer for the New York Times during the Pentagon Papers case. His name is James Goodale. I was helping him write his memoirs. It was a lot about the First Amendment and how for 40 years newspapers had reshaped how the courts see the freedom of the press. And around April 2010, an organization no one had heard of called WikiLeaks released a video showing soldiers killing unarmed civilians and 2 Reuters journalists in Iraq. And this was the start of a year-long release of classified material by from the United States government by WikiLeaks. And all of a sudden we had people all over television claiming that WikiLeaks should be prosecuted. And that Julian Assange was breaking the Espionage Act and he belonged in jail. And we had learned 40 years ago from the Pentagon Papers case that actually this was protected by the First Amendment. This was exactly what the Freedom of the Press Clause was first established for, to publish information that's in the public interest that the government does not want you to know. And I started writing about this frequently. I ended up at the Electronic Frontier Foundation working as a legal activist writing about surveillance and free speech. And so around the same time, the government did something interesting. They knew that they couldn't censor WikiLeaks because of the Pentagon Papers case 40 years ago. And so what they ended up doing was, instead of going to court to get a court order, they decided to a couple officials unofficially pressured Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal to cut off donations to WikiLeaks, so to essentially censor them by financial strangulation. And Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal take up 95% of all of the payment processing in the US, at least back then. And we thought this was a real injustice at EFF. You know, they would have been laughed out of court if they went to this to a judge, but instead they were able to get away with it because it was this unofficial censorship. So we had this idea of starting a new organization to not only take donations to WikiLeaks, but also to take donations to a bunch of other independent innovative journalism organizations that were doing great work around transparency and government secrecy. Because, in the 2 years since WikiLeaks had become front page news, it was evident that government secrecy was still at an all-time high. In 2012, I think the number is 93 or 94 million pages of classified information went through the US government, which was an all-time high, which the year before it was an all-time high, and then going back 10 years before that, it had just been a slow rise. And so, this was a giant problem that needed many solutions, not just one, not just WikiLeaks. And so we formed our organization about a year and a half ago. Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers Whistleblowers, one of our co-founders, and two of our other founding board members were Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras. And about 2 months after we officially launched our organization, a then unknown person named Edward Snowden started contacting them through encrypted channels. And after a few months, of course, in June 5th, 2013, The Guardian published the first of the Edward Snowden stories that showed that the NSA was collecting every single phone record, virtually every single phone record in the United States, billions and billions and billions a year. And this was exactly the type of journalism that we had been advocating for, that journalist organizations shouldn't be towing the government line, they shouldn't be self-censoring themselves like they did in 2005 when the first NSA scandal came out. And here we had two of our original board members being recipients of this information. And actually just last month, Edward Snowden officially joined Daniel Ellsberg on our board of directors. The whistleblower that kind of made whistleblowing in the United States a legitimate avenue to get information to the public, and then the most famous whistleblower that we've seen in quite some time. It's been an amazing experience seeing the way that the public has reacted to Edward Snowden, and now has shown light on everything that Tom Drake and others have been saying for years about the NSA and how they have really trampled over the Fourth Amendment and all of our privacy rights. And so we can get into a bunch more later. We have a technology project that's helping hopefully future whistleblowers leak to media organizations, and we can talk about all of the problems that have happened in the past 6 or 7 years that have allowed the government to, as Jesselyn said, prosecute more whistleblowers than all administrations combined. So with that, I can hand it off to Tom.